It started quietly, so quietly that no one even noticed. Seattle, 1974. A city wrapped in mist and rain, where the smell of wet asphalt and coffee drifted through the streets. Students hurried to class at the University of Washington. Couples laughed in bars on the waterfront, and the city's heartbeat was calm, until the disappearances began. The first was Karen Sparks, a 21-year-old student. She lived alone in a small basement apartment near campus. On the night of January 4th, she fell asleep after studying late. The next morning, her roommate found her lying in bed, barely alive, skull fractured, a steel rod from her bed frame driven into her body. The attacker had vanished without a sound. Detectives swarmed the scene. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no witness. Just a trail of blood and the echo of violence. For weeks the city held its breath. Then came Linda Healy, bright, responsible, a radio announcer. She vanished from her own bedroom in broad daylight. Her bed was neatly made, the pillowcase missing. A bloodstain soaked through the mattress, hidden beneath the blanket. Her friends described her as cautious, always locking doors. Yet somehow someone had walked right in. The police had nothing, no motive, no suspect, no pattern. But the fear began to grow. March brought rain and a third victim. Donna Manson, a student at Evergreen State College, disappeared while walking to a concert. She was never seen again. April. Susan Rancourt, gone after a night class at Central Washington University. May. Roberta Parks, missing from Oregon State. June. Brenda Ball, last seen leaving a tavern outside Seattle. One by one they vanished. Always young. Always kind. Always the same dark hair parted neatly in the middle. Detective Bob Keppel, working the Seattle case, started to notice a chilling rhythm. The disappearances came every few weeks, always near universities, always without witnesses. He looked at the map on his wall and realized the dots formed a spreading web. "This guy's moving," he whispered to his partner. "He's not just local. He's hunting." July 14, 1974. Lake Sammamish State Park. The sun was bright that Sunday, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and sunscreen. Thousands came to the lake that day, laughing, swimming, playing volleyball. Somewhere among them a predator walked freely, blending in, smiling, wearing a white shirt and a sling around his arm. "Hi," he said to a young woman by the restroom. "I'm Ted, I hurt my arm. Could you help me load my sailboat?" He looked harmless, polite, even charming. She hesitated, then smiled and agreed. Together they walked toward the parking lot. But when they reached his small tan Volkswagen Beetle, she frowned. "Where's the boat?" Ted smiled, the corners of his mouth tightening slightly. "It's just up the hill," he lied. Something inside her, instinct, luck, fate, screamed no. She stepped back, mumbling an excuse, and hurried away. Later that day, two other women weren't so lucky. Janice Ott and Denise Nasland vanished from that same park. Witnesses remembered only one thing. The man's name was Ted, and he drove a tan Volkswagen. By nightfall, Seattle police had their first solid description. Tall, clean-cut, handsome, early 30s. The sketch appeared on every newspaper in Washington. One name kept surfacing from the tip lines. Ted Bundy. Law student. Republican campaign worker. Intelligent, polite, seemingly incapable of violence. When detectives questioned him, he laughed easily. "Yes, I drive a Volkswagen. No, I've never been to that park. They had nothing to hold him on." He walked out of the station smiling, and disappeared into the night. To the world, Ted Bundy was everything a young man in the 1970s was supposed to be. Handsome, intelligent, ambitious. He smiled often, held doors open for strangers, and spoke with the calm confidence of someone destined for success. He was studying law, volunteering for political campaigns and dating a kind, devoted woman named Elizabeth Klopfer. Elizabeth called him Ted with the warm eyes. They had met in 1969 at a Seattle bar. She a young secretary and single mother, he a charming law student. He made her feel safe. He made her believe in a future. By 1974 they were deeply entwined. Ted read bedtime stories to her daughter, cooked dinners and whispered plans about marriage. To Elizabeth he was the perfect man. But slowly things began to change. It started with small things. Ted would vanish for entire weekends, offering vague excuses. He'd show up with scratches on his hands, dirt on his clothes, a faint smell of pine and sweat. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and find him standing at the window, staring into the dark. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd just smile. "Nothing, Liz, go back to sleep." But Elizabeth wasn't blind. She saw the news reports, the missing women, the police sketches, the tan Volkswagen Beetle. She saw how the man in the drawing looked disturbingly like her boyfriend. And then, one evening, she found something under the passenger seat of Ted's car, a bag. Inside, a crowbar, ropes, strips of cloth, and a pair of women's gloves. When she confronted him, Ted laughed softly, reaching out to touch her hair. "Liz," he said, "you know I work at a medical supply company. These are for that. Don't you trust me?" His voice was so calm, so convincing that she forced herself to believe him. But that night when he left, she cried until morning. By fall of 1974, the killings in Seattle stopped. For a moment the city exhaled, thinking the nightmare was over. It wasn't. Bundy had simply moved. He drove south, crossing into Utah, enrolling in a new law program in Salt Lake City. To his friends there, he was witty, charming, articulate, the kind of man who could talk his way out of anything. And he often did, but his hunger never left him. In October, Melissa Smith, the police chief's daughter, vanished after leaving a bar. 9 days later, her body was found in the mountains, beaten, strangled, and mutilated. 15 days after that, Laura Amy, another young woman, disappeared. Her remains were found in the same area. The killer's pattern had returned, sharper than ever. In Seattle, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She still loved him, but something inside her screamed. She read every article, every police bulletin, every interview, and one day she picked up the phone. "Seattle Police Department," a voice answered. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Then she whispered, "My name is Elizabeth Klopfer. I think my boyfriend might be the man you're looking for." The detective listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. When she said his name, Ted Bundy, there was a pause. They already had that name on their list. But Ted was always one step ahead. By the time detectives tried to follow up, he had already left Washington. He was a ghost again, driving his tan Volkswagen across the deserts of Utah, hunting under new skies. One November night, in a quiet suburb outside Salt Lake City, a young woman named Carol Durant was approached by a man in a police uniform. He told her someone had tried to break into her car. He showed her a badge. He sounded official, calm, trustworthy, everything evil rarely looks like. She followed him to his car, a tan Volkswagen. As soon as the doors locked, his smile changed. He pulled a gun. Carol fought. She scratched his face, kicked, bit, and finally leapt from the moving vehicle, rolling onto the road and running for her life. She survived, and gave the police the first clear description of her attacker, a man named Ted, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle. The mask was beginning to crack. By the spring of 1975, the disappearances had spread across 3 states, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, each case the same, a young woman, dark hair, parted in the middle, vanishing near a college campus. Each scene silent, methodical, precise. But the killer had begun to make mistakes. That summer, Ted Bundy was living quietly in Salt Lake City. He was still writing to Elizabeth in Seattle, sending her letters full of affection and warmth. "I miss you, I'll come home soon." He talked about marriage, about starting over. But at night he drove through the suburbs, searching for new faces in the dark. The night of August 16, 1975, it was just past 2 a.m. Officer Bob Hayward of the Utah Highway Patrol noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle lurking near a neighborhood that had recently reported several break-ins. When the patrol car turned, the Beetle sped up. Hayward followed, lights flashing. The car darted down a dead-end street and stopped. The driver stepped out, calm, polite, smiling. "Evening, officer," he said. "I'm just heading home." Hayward's flashlight swept through the car. A ski mask, a crowbar, ropes, a box of trash bags, and on the floor a pair of handcuffs. "What are these for?" Hayward asked. Bundy laughed lightly. "Oh, the masks for skiing. The rest just junk I keep around." He was arrested on suspicion of burglary, but even in handcuffs, Bundy was composed, charming, cooperative. He chatted with officers as if nothing was wrong. When they searched his apartment later, they found maps, a stack of plaster bandages, and a camera with undeveloped film. Still, there was no direct proof of murder. He was released on bail. The breakthrough detective Jerry Thompson couldn't shake his instinct. This man was the killer. He called the police in Seattle. There the name Ted Bundy appeared again, the same name Elizabeth Klopfer had given months before. Thompson moved quickly. He ordered the Volkswagen Beetle impounded and searched again, inch by inch. Under the seat, wedged into the carpet, they found tiny strands of hair. They were dark, brittle, and long. The lab results took weeks. When they came back, the report made the detectives go silent. The hair matched 3 known victims: Melissa Smith, Karen Campbell, and Carol Duranch, the girl who'd escaped. It was the first physical evidence linking Ted Bundy to the murders. The arrest, November 1975. Bundy was re-arrested in Utah, this time charged with the kidnapping and attempted murder of Carol Duranch. When the officers came to his door, he looked surprised, but not afraid. He even smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is all a big misunderstanding." The reporters were waiting outside as he was led away in cuffs. For the first time, America saw the face of the man who had haunted its headlines. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a politician, a lawyer, confident, clean-cut, intelligent. And that was what made him so dangerous. The trial, February 1976, Salt Lake City. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, sketch artists, and curious onlookers. Ted Bundy sat at the defense table, dressed neatly in a navy suit, hair combed, hands folded. He had insisted on representing himself. "I know the law," he told the judge. "I can defend myself better than anyone else." During the trial, he charmed everyone, even the guards. He smiled at the jury, joked with reporters, and whispered legal references to the judge as if they were colleagues. But the evidence was strong. Carol Duranch testified, trembling but firm, describing the fake police badge, the gun, and the car. Then came the forensic match. Her hair in his car, the handcuffs identical to the ones she described. On June 30, 1976, the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. 15 years in prison for aggravated kidnapping. Bundy nodded slightly, showing no emotion. But behind the mask, his mind was already turning. The transfer while serving his sentence in Utah. Bundy was indicted for murder in Colorado. The death of nurse Karen Campbell, abducted from a hotel hallway in Aspen. He was transferred there in 1977 to stand trial once again. The guards called him the gentleman prisoner. He was polite, articulate, always studying law books. They trusted him, but they didn't realize they were watching a man who saw walls as puzzles, not barriers. Bundy had no intention of staying behind them. Aspen, Colorado, June 1977. The air in the Rocky Mountains was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Inside the small Pitkin County courthouse, a tall man in a blue shirt sat quietly at a table stacked with law books. He wasn't a lawyer, not officially, but he played one better than most. Ted Bundy had been moved to Colorado to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell, the young nurse who had disappeared 2 years earlier. To the guards and court staff, he was a model prisoner, calm, polite, and impossibly confident. He smiled when spoken to, quoted legal cases from memory, and seemed to know the system inside and out. But behind that composure, he was studying everything: the guards' schedules, the architecture, the windows, the doors, the courthouse library. June 7, 1977. Bundy sat in the law library on the second floor, preparing his defense. Because he was representing himself, the judge had allowed him to move freely during research hours. No handcuffs, no guard standing over him. It was a warm morning and the windows were open to the mountain air. Bundy flipped through legal textbooks, his eyes not really reading the words. He glanced at the clock, then at the hallway, empty. He stood, moved to the window, and looked down. The ground was 2 stories below, hard, rocky, but freedom was worth any risk. Bundy backed up, took a breath, and ran. He vaulted through the window. For a second, the world was silent, just the rush of air and the blur of green trees. Then he hit the ground hard. His ankle twisted, pain shooting up his leg. But he didn't stop. He pulled himself up and limped toward the woods. By the time the guards realized he was gone, Ted Bundy had vanished into the mountains. The manhunt, the news spread fast. Every police unit in Colorado was mobilized. Helicopters scanned the forests. Search dogs were brought in. Locals were told to lock their doors. But Bundy was clever and he'd packed light and moved quickly. He stole food from cabins, changed clothes, and traveled by night. For 6 days he stayed hidden in the wilderness. Cold, hungry, limping, but alive. Then, exhausted, he tried to steal a car from a cabin driveway. 2 deputies spotted him. When they drew their guns, Bundy raised his hands and smiled faintly. "Well," he said, "I guess that didn't go quite as planned." He was returned to jail, thinner, bruised, and limping, but somehow more confident. He'd tested the system, and he'd found its weakness. The second plan back in custody, Bundy was moved to the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, a small, outdated facility. His cell was small, just a cot, a sink, and a single overhead vent. But to Bundy it wasn't a vent, it was a doorway. He started losing weight, pretending to be depressed and withdrawn. He stopped eating, dropped nearly 30 pounds. At night, while other inmates slept, he used a hacksaw blade smuggled in by a visitor to widen the hole above his cell. It was slow, careful work. 1 screw, 1 scrape, 1 cut at a time. Dust fell into his hair. The metal bit his hands. But he didn't stop. By December 1977, the hole was just wide enough for his thin body. He waited, patient as a predator. The Christmas escape, December 30th, 1977. The guards were distracted by the holidays. Laughter echoed from the watchroom, the night shift light. Bundy took his chance. He arranged his bed neatly, stacking books and blankets to resemble a sleeping body under the sheets. Then he climbed up, pulling himself into the narrow vent. The metal scraped against his ribs, but he kept moving, inch by inch, until he reached the crawl space above the ceiling. For the next hour, he crawled in darkness, the only sound his breath and the distant hum of the prison lights. He found the vent leading to the warden's apartment, which was empty that night. Bundy pushed it open, dropped into the room, and paused. On a hanger nearby, a clean prison guard's uniform. He put it on, straightened his hair, and walked out of the jail's front door. No one stopped him. No one even looked twice. By the time the guards discovered the dummy in his bed, Ted Bundy was already gone. Freedom, he drove through the night, stealing a car, switching license plates, sleeping in abandoned cabins. He moved south, through Colorado, Kansas, and finally Florida. Each mile took him farther from the mountains and closer to the warmth of the southern coast. In January 1978, he arrived in Tallahassee, the home of Florida State University. He checked into a cheap boarding house under a false name, Chris Hagen. He smiled at the landlady, carried her groceries, and said he was just a student passing through. No one recognized him. No one saw the darkness behind his smile. For a moment, Ted Bundy was free again, and that freedom would cost more lives. Tallahassee, Florida, January 1978. The air was soft and warm, a strange contrast to the winter storms raging elsewhere in the country. The Florida State University campus glowed under the streetlights, palm trees swaying gently, laughter echoing from the dorms. It was the start of a new semester. No one in that quiet southern town could imagine that a man who'd just escaped from a Colorado jail was walking among them. Ted Bundy had arrived weeks earlier. He rented a small room in a boarding house on College Avenue. The room was bare, a single bed, a sink, a mirror. He spent most of his days wandering the campus, sitting in coffee shops, watching. He told people his name was Chris Hagen. He was polite, neat, and calm. No one questioned him, but inside something had changed. He was broke, starving, and desperate. The calm, organized killer who once planned his crimes with surgical precision was gone. What was left was chaos, hunger, rage, and the thrill of power. The Chi Omega sorority house. It was just after 3 a.m. on January 15, 1978. The Chi Omega sorority house stood at the corner of West College Avenue, its white columns gleaming faintly under the moon. Inside, 30 young women slept soundly after a Saturday night out. Down the street, Bundy walked alone, a shadow gliding through the humid air. He had been drinking. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his mind fractured between brilliance and madness. He carried a piece of firewood he had picked up from the yard of a fraternity house. The side door of Chi Omega was unlocked. Bundy stepped inside. The attack. The house was silent, except for the hum of a refrigerator and the ticking of a hallway clock. Bundy moved barefoot, the wood in his hand tight against his palm. He passed one sleeping room, then another. In room 8, Margaret Bowman, age 21, slept peacefully. Bundy raised the club and brought it down on her head, once, twice, 3 times, until the room filled with the dull rhythm of murder. He turned and crossed to the next bed. Lisa Levy, 20, stirred in her sleep. Bundy hit her too, then strangled her with a pair of pantyhose. When he was done, he bit her, hard. The imprint of his teeth would become the mark that would one day end his life. He moved to another room. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were next. Both brutally attacked but miraculously survived, waking just in time to see the outline of a man retreating into the darkness. The entire rampage lasted less than 15 minutes. When Bundy left the house, He was covered in sweat, his pulse racing. He walked calmly into the night as if nothing had happened. The morning after, at 3:20 a.m., Nita Neary, another student, came home from a party and saw a man leaving the Chi Omega house. He was carrying a log. He stopped for a moment under the streetlight, his face half in shadow, before disappearing. When Nita walked inside, she heard faint moans. Then she screamed. The house erupted in chaos, doors opening, voices shouting, sirens growing louder outside. Police officers rushed in to find a scene out of nightmare. Blood on the walls, broken glass, lifeless bodies on the floor. The brutality shocked even veteran detectives. The precision, the rage, the quiet exit. Whoever had done this had moved like a ghost. The final murder: Bundy fled north the same night. 2 weeks later, in Lake City, about 150 miles away, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach vanished from her middle school. For 7 weeks, police searched the woods and rivers. They found her body in a pig shed, strangled and discarded like garbage. It was his last murder, and it sealed his fate. The net tightens. By February, Bundy was living in Pensacola under another stolen identity. He had no money left, no car, and no friends. He stole credit cards, gas receipts, and even a television to survive. The man who once outsmarted police across 3 states was now sleeping in a stolen Volkswagen Beetle, a cruel echo of the car that had made him invisible years before. On the morning of February 15, 1978, Officer David Lee noticed that Beetle on patrol. The plates didn't match. When he turned his cruiser, the car took off. The chase was short. The Volkswagen skidded, hit a curb, and stopped. The driver, thin, unshaven, eyes wild, leapt out and fought. They wrestled in the dirt until the officer drew his gun. "Freeze!" Lee shouted. Bundy stopped, struggling, breathing heavily. He looked up at the officer and smiled faintly. "I wish you'd killed me," he said. When they brought him to the station, he refused to give his name. In his pockets were stolen IDs from college students and a stolen credit card. 2 days later, his fingerprints came back. The man in custody was Theodore Robert Bundy, escaped murderer, suspected serial killer, and now finally captured again. Miami, Florida, June 1979. The courtroom buzzed like a movie set. Reporters lined the aisles, cameras flashed, microphones glinted under the lights. For the first time in American history, a murder trial would be broadcast live on national television. And at the center of it all sat Theodore Robert Bundy, clean-shaven in a crisp blue suit, smiling politely at the jury. He was no longer the phantom of the night. He was the man America had come to stare at. He stood accused of 2 counts of first-degree murder, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, the Chi Omega victims, plus 3 counts of attempted murder and burglary. But Bundy didn't seem nervous. He looked excited. "The show begins." Bundy had fired most of his lawyers. He insisted on defending himself. "I have a right to control my own defense," he told the judge. Judge Edward Cowart, an older man with tired eyes, sighed. "Mr. Bundy, you are entitled to represent yourself, but I strongly advise against it." Bundy smiled. "I appreciate that, Your Honor." Every morning he walked into court as if walking into a press conference, greeting reporters by name, flashing his charm at the cameras. He objected to questions, quoted obscure legal precedents, and even flirted with some of the female reporters. To the public, he was fascinating, terrifyingly normal, articulate, almost likable. And that was the danger. The evidence. The prosecution built its case slowly. They brought in witnesses from the Chi Omega house, survivors who had seen a man's silhouette that night. One of them, Nita Neary, stood trembling at the stand. She described seeing a man leaving the house carrying a piece of wood. When the prosecutor asked if she recognized anyone in the courtroom, she pointed. Her hand shook. "It was him," she said softly. Then came the forensic experts. A police technician displayed photographs of the bite mark found on Lisa Levy's body. Next to it, dental casts taken from Bundy's own mouth. The comparison was unmistakable. The alignment, the chipped incisor, a perfect match. In the gallery, gasps rippled through the crowd. Bundy, seated at the defense table, stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. For a moment, the mask cracked, just a flicker of fury behind the eyes. Then he leaned back, composed himself, and smiled again, as if none of it mattered. The performance Bundy turned the trial into theater. He cross-examined witnesses with charm, sometimes humor, sometimes menace. He made grand speeches to the jury, pacing, gesturing, quoting law books. He even proposed marriage to Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker and loyal admirer who believed in his innocence. During a testimony break, he asked her on the stand, "Will you marry me?" She said yes. Under Florida law, the proposal, made in court before a judge, was legally binding. And just like that, Ted Bundy had a wife. The press loved it. America was watching, horrified and fascinated, as a killer turned his own trial into a love story. The verdict, July 24, 1979. The jury returned after 7 hours of deliberation. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy guilty of murder in the first degree." The words hung in the air like thunder. Bundy didn't flinch. He stared at the ceiling, a faint smile playing at his lips, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Judge Cowart's voice broke slightly as he read the sentence. "It is ordered that you be put to death by a current of electricity until you are dead. Take care of yourself, young man. I say that sincerely. You are a bright young man. I wish you had used your talents for good." Bundy nodded politely, smiling again. "Thank you, Your Honor." The second trial a year later, Bundy faced another trial, this time for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Once again, the evidence was overwhelming. Once again, he represented himself. And once again, he was found guilty. 2 death sentences, 2 states, 2 lifetimes of horror in one man. The legend grows from his cell on death row. Bundy began to receive letters, hundreds of them, fans, admirers, women who sent photos, promises, prayers. The media called it the Bundy phenomenon. To some, he was a monster. To others, he was mystery incarnate, the perfect, smiling killer. He granted interviews, played mind games with psychologists, and maintained his innocence for years. But time was running out. The appeals failed. The mask was finally slipping for good. Florida State Prison, death row. A narrow concrete corridor lined with steel doors and numbers. Behind one of them, Ted Bundy sat at a small desk, the dim light from a barred window spilling across his hands. He had been here for nearly 10 years. 10 years of appeals, interviews, delays, and denials. In the beginning, he believed he could still win, that some clever argument or loophole would save him. He charmed his lawyers, smiled at the guards, and spoke to reporters like a man rehearsing his own myth. But time is a cruel equalizer. By 1989, the cameras were no longer his audience. The only sound he heard was the hum of the fluorescent light and the slow ticking of the clock above his cell door. The final days Bundy's last appeals had failed. The execution date was set for January 24, 1989. Outside the prison, journalists camped for weeks. Protesters gathered, some holding candles for the souls of his victims, others waving signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Inside, Bundy's confidence was gone. He had grown thinner, pale, the charm fading into exhaustion. He spent his last nights talking to the prison chaplain and the FBI agents who had studied him for years. The agents wanted answers. The families of the victims needed closure. Bundy hesitated for months, bargaining for time. But with the clock ticking, he began to talk. The confession. In the final 3 days before his execution, Bundy gave what would become known as the death row confessions. He spoke softly, rationally, describing the murders as if they were case studies. Detached, emotionless. "I don't remember all their names," he said, staring at the floor, "but I remember what I did." He admitted to killing more than 30 women across 6 states, from Washington to Utah, Colorado to Florida. Sometimes, he said, he went back to the scenes. Sometimes he took photographs. Sometimes he just watched, reliving the power, the control. When asked why, Bundy deflected. He blamed pornography, loneliness, and impulse. But the investigators knew better. Bundy didn't kill because he was out of control. He killed because he wanted to feel godlike. One agent later said, he wanted the last word. Even his confession was an act of control. The morning of January 24, 1989. The prison woke before dawn. Outside the gates, a crowd of nearly 200 people gathered in the darkness, some praying, most celebrating. When news spread that the execution was imminent, someone set off fireworks. The sky lit up with flashes of orange and blue. Inside, Bundy was calm. He'd spent the night with his lawyer and a Methodist minister. He asked for a simple breakfast: steak, eggs, toast, hash browns, milk, and black coffee. He didn't eat much. At 7:06 a.m. the guards came for him. He stood quietly, hands cuffed, and walked down the final hallway, the last mile, in silence. The execution chamber. The room was cold, sterile, painted white. In the center sat the electric chair, worn from use, its leather straps darkened by sweat and years. The guards guided Bundy into it. He sat down without resistance. A metal cap was placed on his head, a wet sponge beneath it to conduct the current. He looked up at the witnesses behind the glass, journalists, officials, relatives of his victims. When asked for his final words, Bundy's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Tell my family and friends I love them." The warden nodded to the executioner. At 7:16 a.m. the switch was thrown. A blinding flash filled the room. Bundy's body jerked once, twice, and then went still. The smell of burnt cloth filled the air. After 1 minute, the prison doctor checked his pulse. Time of death 7:16 a.m. It was over. Outside the gates. When the official announcement reached the crowd outside, cheers erupted. Strangers hugged. Fireworks exploded. Some chanted his name. Not in reverence, but in defiance. For the first time in 15 years, America exhaled. The reign of Ted Bundy was over. The fear was gone. But the fascination would never die. Epilogue. Years later, psychologists still studied him. Writers wrote about him. Filmmakers reimagined him. He became more than a man, a warning, a mirror, a question. How could someone look so normal and be so utterly evil? Ted Bundy had wanted to be remembered. He dreamed of being important, of leaving a mark. And he did, but not the one he imagined. He left behind silence, grief, and a truth humanity would never unsee. That sometimes the monster wears the face of the man next door.